Sign it. That was all she said. Victoria didn't look at me when she pushed the paper across the mahogany table. She didn't need to. To her, I was just a ghost occupying an expensive chair, a minor inconvenience on an otherwise beautiful Tuesday morning. The room smelled of high-grade polish, Italian leather, and the heavy metallic scent of absolute certainty. We were on the 42nd floor of the Vance Tower. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass, the city stretched out like a concrete ocean. It was an ocean my father had spent 40 years conquering. And now, he was dead. The body wasn't even cold in the family crypt, but the wolves were already wiping their mouths. Julian sat to her right. My older brother, the golden boy. He was adjusting his platinum cufflinks, his eyes locked on his reflection in the polished wood of the table. He was smiling, not a wide, happy smile, a small, tight smile of a man who had finally cleared the board. "It's a generous settlement, Thomas," Julian said. His voice had that smooth, media-trained warmth that he used on investors. "Given your lack of involvement in the firm's growth, we wanted to ensure you had a little hobby to keep you busy." I looked down at the document. Schedule 4B, Allocation of Non-Core Legacy Assets. In plain English, it was the trash pile. While Julian received the glass towers, the luxury beachfront developments, and the $500 million in liquid capital, I was being handed the bones, the ancient, forgotten foundations, the dry-as-dust subterranean leases my grandfather had bought in the 1950s and forgotten about. Basements, subway-adjacent crawl spaces, decommissioned utility tunnels beneath the historic district. To a man like Julian, if an asset didn't have a glittering logo on top of it, it didn't exist. "You're being quiet, Tom," Julian sneered, leaning back. "Don't tell me you're going to make a scene. It doesn't suit you. You've always been so good at being invisible." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch. In a boardroom, silence is a weapon. Most people get uncomfortable. They start talking to fill the void. They give away their position. Julian's smile began to twitch at the corners. He hated when he couldn't read me. He hated that I didn't cry, or scream, or beg for a bigger piece of the pie. I picked up the heavy Mont Blanc pen. It felt cold against my fingers. The marble in the lobby downstairs was polished so clean you could see the fear on the faces of the middle managers walking through it every morning. They knew how Julian ruled, by fear, by noise, by flash. He thought power was loud. I knew better. Power is the thing that allows the loud things to exist. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed smooth and black. Thomas Vance. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. It wasn't a tailored Brioni like Julian's. It was an off-the-rack gray suit, dull, unremarkable. "Thank you, Victoria," I said quietly. My voice was calm, steady, a flat line. "Thank you, Julian. I hope the towers bring you everything you think you deserve." Julian laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed off the glass. "They will, little brother, they will. Enjoy your dirt." I turned and walked out. The walk to the elevator was long. I passed the rows of glass cubicles, the young analysts staring at screens, the vice presidents whispering in corners. None of them looked at me. They already knew. The corporate jungle has a very specific radar for the dying, and I had just been stripped of my birthright. I was a dead man walking. When I stepped into the elevator, I didn't press the button for the lobby. I pressed the button for sub-level 3, the basement. The elevator dropped. The air grew cooler, heavier. The smell of expensive cologne and air-conditioned luxury faded, replaced by the damp, honest scent of concrete, old iron, and earth. Sub-level 3 was where the old archives were kept. Row after row of steel shelves holding the paper blueprints of a city built over a century ago. This was my domain. For 10 years, while Julian was flying to Dubai and Monaco to secure funding for his glittering glass monsters, I was down here, reading, mapping, learning the anatomy of the city. I walked to my small metal desk. A single green-shaded lamp illuminated a massive yellowed map of the downtown district. My father had been a brilliant businessman, but toward the end of his life his mind had softened. Victoria had convinced him to modernize, to sell off the old brick-and-mortar heritages to fund Julian's massive leveraged expansions. But my father had one secret rule, a rule he only told me late one night when the whiskey had loosened his tongue. "Thomas," he had whispered, his grip tight on my wrist, "the sky belongs to whoever pays the taxes today, but the dirt belongs to the man who owns the rights forever." Julian thought he had robbed me. He thought he had pushed me out of the family empire with a pocketful of lint and dry dirt. I pulled out a leather-bound ledger from the bottom drawer of my desk. It was the master registry of the subterranean leases I had just signed for. I turned the pages, my fingers tracing the elegant handwritten script of the city surveyors from 1952. Julian's crown jewel was the Vance Horizon project, a 70-story megatower currently under construction in the heart of the financial district. It was 90% complete. It was his masterpiece, the project that would cement his name as a visionary. He had leveraged 80% of the company's total value to build it. I leaned over the map, aligning the modern plot lines of the Vance Horizon project with my 1952 subterranean registry. A quiet smile touched my lips. To build a 70-story tower of glass and steel, you need deep earth pilings, you need massive concrete caissons anchored into the bedrock, and more importantly, you need high-voltage power lines and water mains that run deep below the street level to feed the beast. According to the map, the eastern foundation pilings of Julian's 70-story masterpiece passed directly through a 300-meter stretch of underground tunnels, a forgotten private subterranean parcel. The exact parcel listed on page 14 of my new inheritance. Julian hadn't just built his dream tower on my land, he had anchored it directly into my lungs, and to feed electricity to his 70 floors of luxury penthouses, his main power vault had to trespass through my private underground easement. For the last 3 years, he had been building a monument to his own arrogance on property he didn't own. He had never checked the ancient deed restrictions. He didn't think he needed to. After all, it was just family land. It was just the old, dead history he thought he had buried. I closed the ledger. The sound was like a small clap of thunder in the quiet room. They laughed when I walked out of the boardroom. They thought they had left me with nothing but dust. But they forgot one very basic law of nature. Dust is what everything turns into when it falls. And right now, I was holding the ground. The silence of sublevel 3 was my sanctuary. For 10 years, my family viewed my daily descent into this basement as a form of house arrest. A quiet exile for the son who didn't possess the predatory glare or the sharp, media-ready teeth required to run Vance Global Developments. They thought I was hiding from my failures. In reality, I was studying their blind spots. Julian believed that business was an act of public theater. To him, power meant a $2,000 suit, a reservation at a restaurant where the wait list was 6 months long, and a press release with his name in the headline. He operated entirely in the light, where everyone could see him. And because he was always looking for the cameras, he never looked down. He never realized that the most dangerous man in the room is the one who cleans up after the meeting, the one who sits in the back, takes the notes, organizes the files, and says nothing. When you are perceived as weak, people don't hide their sins from you. They commit them right in front of your face, confident that you lack the courage to use them. I remembered a dinner 3 years ago. It was Victoria's 55th birthday, hosted at a private estate in the Hamptons. The wine was flowing, and the air was thick with the casual cruelty of the ultra-rich. Julian was already 3 scotches deep, boasting to a circle of hedge fund managers about the land acquisition for the Vance Horizon project. He had bypassed the traditional zoning laws by utilizing an obscure municipal fast-track code. The beauty of the city, Julian had said, swirling his glass, is that the bureaucrats are cheap. You don't ask for permission to build. You build so fast that by the time they notice the violation, the building is already generating $50 million a year. What are they going to do? Tell me to tear down a skyscraper? The men laughed, patting his back. Victoria smiled from the head of the table, her eyes shining with the pride of a mother who had successfully bred a monster. I sat at the far end of the table, cutting my steak in silence. Julian caught my eye and smirked. "Don't worry about it, Tom," he called out across the table, ensuring everyone heard. "This is big boy math. Just keep making sure the old file cabinets don't catch fire." More laughter. I simply nodded, raised my glass in a silent toast, and took a sip of my water. What Julian didn't know was that the next morning, at 5 a.m., I was back in the archives. I pulled the municipal fast-track codes he had boasted about. I cross-referenced them with the historical registry of the downtown district. That was the day I discovered the fatal flaw in his masterpiece. To expedite the construction of the Vance Horizon project, Julian's legal team had skipped the standard deep-tier title search. They verified the surface rights. They verified the air rights. They saw that our father's name was on the historic plot from 1974, and they assumed that gave them total dominion. But our father hadn't bought that plot in 1974. He had bought the surface structure of an old railway station. The subterranean layer beneath it, the actual bedrock and the abandoned utility arteries, had been split off in 1952 during the city's major transit expansion. My grandfather had bought those subterranean rights through a shell company called Acheron Holdings, which was later absorbed into the family's dead asset ledger, Schedule 4B. The very ledger that now bore my signature. I spent years quietly building my hidden empire while they built their house of cards. Every time Julian needed a minor easement or an underground utility connection for his various midtown projects, I didn't fight him. I didn't send a legal notice. I let the paperwork slide through my desk. I approved the temporary construction permits through our legacy entities, signing them with a faded stamp that nobody bothered to verify. I was giving him rope, yard by yard, mile by mile. I let him wrap it around his own neck, and the entire time, he thought he was pulling me along behind him. Victoria was the architect of my isolation. After my mother passed, Victoria made it her personal mission to ensure I was systematically erased from the family's public legacy. She altered the seating arrangements at charity galas. She quietly removed my name from the foundations of the buildings our father dedicated. She managed the family narrative with the precision of a high-ranking military general. I remember walking into her sitting room a month before my father died. He was already bedridden, his mind drifting in the fog of heavy medication. She was standing by the window, speaking to the family lawyer in a low, cold whisper. When she saw me enter, she didn't flinch, she didn't even stop talking. She treated me like a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong room. "Thomas," she said, her voice dripping with artificial pity once the lawyer left. "Your father's affairs need to be streamlined. We have to think about the market stability of Vance Global. If the public sees a fragmented succession, the stock will crater. Julian is the face of this family. You have your own quiet life. We want to protect you from the stress of the corporate world." "I understand, Victoria," I had replied. "Do you?" She stepped closer, the scent of her expensive French perfume filling the space between us. It was a suffocating, aggressive scent, because your father wanted to leave you a seat on the board, but we both know that would be a disaster. You don't have the stomach for this, Thomas. You never did. Sign the relinquishment forms when the lawyers bring them. Don't make this ugly. "I won't make a scene," I promised her. She smiled then, a triumphant, dismissive smile. She thought she had broken me. She thought her decades of subtle psychological warfare had successfully hollowed me out. What she failed to understand is that when you strip a man of his vanity, you strip him of his vulnerability. By making me invisible, she allowed me to move through their lives like a ghost. And ghosts see everything. Now, looking at the master maps in the dim light of the basement, I could see the exact shape of their doom. The Vance Horizon project was scheduled to hold its grand opening gala in exactly 7 days. The mayor would be there. The governor would be there. Billions of dollars in foreign investment capital were tied to the building's formal certification of occupancy. Julian had already taken out short-term, high-interest bridge loans based on the guaranteed opening date. If the building failed to secure its final utility and structural occupancy permits by next Friday, the interest rates would double. If the delay lasted more than 30 days, the bank syndicates had the right to call in the entire $2 billion loan. It was a beautiful, hyper-leveraged trap. A massive skyscraper built on a foundation of absolute arrogance. My phone buzzed on the metal desk. The screen lit up with a notification from the corporate intranet. It was an all-company email sent from Julian's office. Subject: A new era for Vance Global. Attached was a photo of Julian and Victoria standing on the top floor of the Horizon project, holding golden hard hats, smiling against the sunset. The email detailed the official restructuring of the company. My name was nowhere to be found. I had been effectively scrubbed from the corporate directory. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a number I had memorized 3 years ago. It didn't go to a corporate lawyer or a PR firm. It went to a small, windowless office in the Department of Buildings and Safety. The phone rang twice before a tired, gravelly voice answered. "Enforcement Division, Miller." "Mr. Miller," I said, my voice low and completely steady. "This is Thomas Vance. I believe it's time for us to review the easement violations on Grid Sector 12B. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the sound of rustling papers. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Vance," Miller said, his tone suddenly losing all its fatigue, "we've been waiting for your call." "I know," I replied. "Issue the stop work order. Block the utility grid connection. And Mr. Miller, make sure you deliver the notice to my brother personally. I want him to hear the news from the city before he hears it from me." I hung up the phone. The noose was officially tied. Now all that was left to do was wait for them to step onto the trap door. The human brain is a funny thing. When it achieves everything it has ever wanted, it goes blind. It floods itself with dopamine, shuts down its critical defense mechanisms, and assumes that the rest of the world is applauding. For the next 4 days, I watched the celebration from my basement window. Literally, if you stand on a milk crate in the back corner of sub-level 3, there is a small rectangular street-level window that looks out onto the intersection of 4th and Madison. It's covered in iron bars and 50 years of city grime. But if you wipe away the black soot, you can see the base of the Vance Horizon project just 2 blocks away. I watched the catering trucks arrive. Dozens of them. White vans with gold lettering, idling by the curb, unloading crates of Cristal champagne, ice sculptures shaped like abstract skyscrapers, and thousands of dollars worth of white orchids. I watched the red carpet being rolled out across the sidewalk. It was long, plush, and arrogant. It spilled out over the concrete like a tongue licking the boots of the elite. Julian's name was everywhere. It was plastered on the side of the building in giant, temporary digital banners. The Horizon Project, formed by Julian Vance, not Vance Global, not the family, just Julian. He had completely rewritten the history of the company in his own image over the course of 96 hours. On Thursday evening, 24 hours before the grand opening gala, my phone rang. It was an internal extension. Thomas? It was Victoria's personal assistant. Her voice was taut, vibrating with the high-strung anxiety of someone who spent her life managing a tyrant's calendar. "Yes, Sarah," I said smoothly. "Your stepmother requested your presence at the pre-gala briefing tomorrow morning at 9, in the main boardroom on 42. Did she?" I asked, feigning mild surprise. I thought I was no longer required for corporate functions. "It's not a function," Sarah whispered, her voice dropping as if she were afraid the walls were listening. "It's legal. Julian needs you to sign an administrative addendum for the city utility hookups, some minor paperwork mistake from the old records. They need it before the inspectors do the final walkthrough at noon." I looked down at my desk. Sitting right next to my green lamp was a copy of the formal, certified stop work and trespass order issued by the city. It had been stamped at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon. It seemed Julian's legal team had finally hit the invisible brick wall I had built in the dirt 3 years ago. "Tell her I'll be there, Sarah," I said quietly. "Tell her I wouldn't miss it for the world."
Verde.
The next morning, the 42nd floor was chaos. When the elevator doors opened, the usual corporate serenity was gone. It felt like a trading floor during a market crash. Assistants were running down the hallways holding stacks of paper. Vice presidents were huddled in small, desperate circles by the water coolers, their faces pale and their voices hushed. I walked through the glass doors of the executive suite. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even looked at me. The pack was in panic mode, and when the alpha wolves are sweating, the rest of the animals look for a place to hide. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the main boardroom. The contrast was staggering. The room looked like a war room after a devastating ambush. Julian was standing at the head of the table, his jacket off, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His hair, usually immaculate, was damp with sweat. He was screaming into his phone. "What do you mean they won't turn on the grid? We paid the connection fees 6 months ago. Call the commissioner. I don't care if he's at a funeral. Pull him out." Victoria was sitting to his left. She looked older. The flawless, tight skin of her face seemed to have sagged under the weight of the morning's news. Her fingers were wrapped so tightly around her porcelain coffee cup that her knuckles were entirely white. Sitting around the table were 6 of the company's senior corporate attorneys, staring blankly at their laptops like doctors looking at a terminal X-ray. Julian slammed his phone down on the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "They're blocking the occupancy permit," he gasped, his chest heaving. He looked at the lead attorney, a man who pulled in a $2 million retainer every year. "Explain it to me again, in words that don't make me want to throw you out of this fucking window." The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses with a trembling hand. "Julian, it's not a bureaucratic delay, it's a structural and legal injunction. The city received a formal title claim on Grid Sector 12B, the eastern foundation pylons of the Horizon Project, along with the primary high-voltage conduit channels feeding the entire tower's climate control and security systems, are physically occupying private subterranean property. We own the property," Julian roared, slamming his fist down. "We bought the old railway parcel. We own the surface rights, Julian," the lawyer said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We don't own the deep earth easements or the historic transit tunnels beneath it. Those were severed from the deed in 1952. And yesterday afternoon, the legal owner of those subterranean rights filed a formal trespass notice with the Department of Buildings and Safety. By law, the city cannot activate the main power grid or issue an occupancy certificate while a building is actively trespassing on private land." "Who owns it?" Victoria snapped, her voice like cracking ice. "Find them. Offer them double the market value. Offer them triple. Buy the fucking dirt, Julian. We have 300 foreign investors arriving in 6 hours. We tried," the lawyer whispered, looking down at his screen. "The entity that owns the rights is a legacy holdings group called Acheron Holdings. We traced the corporate registry this morning." The lawyer stopped. He looked up, his eyes drifting past Julian, past Victoria, straight to the back of the room. Straight to me. I was leaning against the heavy oak door frame, my hands loosely in my pockets. I had spent 30 years being the shadow in their peripheral vision, But right now, every single eye in that room locked onto me. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. Julian stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He looked from me to the lawyer, and then back to me. The realization didn't hit him all at once. It hit him in waves, draining the color from his face inch by inch until he looked like a ghost. "No," Julian whispered. "No, that's impossible. You don't know how to do something like this." Victoria stood up slowly. Her expensive French perfume filled the air, but it couldn't hide the sharp, metallic scent of sudden, overwhelming fear. Her eyes were wide, locked onto mine. "Thomas," she said, her voice trembling slightly before she forced it back into a commanding tone. "What is the meaning of this? If you're playing some sort of childish game to get more money from the estate, I suggest you stop it immediately. You signed the relinquishment forms. You agreed to the legacy assets." I walked forward. My steps were slow, rhythmic, and completely unhurried. The leather of my shoes made a soft clicking sound against the hardwood perimeter of the room. I didn't look at Julian. I didn't look at the lawyers. I walked straight to the empty chair at the foot of the table, directly opposite my brother, and pulled it out. I didn't sit down. I just rested my hands on the high leather back of the chair, looking across the vast expanse of polished mahogany at the two people who had spent their entire lives treating me like dust. "I didn't play a game, Victoria," I said. My voice was calm. It was the quiet power voice. It had no desperation, no anger, no malice. It was just a statement of absolute, unyielding fact. "I simply accepted the inheritance you gave me. You gave me the dirt. And as it turns out, you built your entire life on my ground." Julian took a step toward me. His hands were clenched into fists, the veins in his neck bulging against the tight collar of his white shirt. For a second, I thought he was going to swing at me. He had always been the physical one, the brother who used his size and his noise to crowd me out of rooms when we were kids. But he stopped. The table was between us, and more than the table, the law was between us. "You miserable little parasite," Julian spat, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and sheer disbelief. "You think you can play corporate raider? You've been sitting in a basement for a decade counting paper clips while I built a $2 billion empire. You don't own anything. I'll have our legal team tie you up in court until you're 90 years old." I didn't blink. I didn't shift my weight. I just looked at him, letting his anger burn itself out against my silence. When he finally stopped breathing heavily, I looked at the lead attorney. "Tell him," I said quietly. The attorney couldn't even look Julian in the eye. He kept his gaze firmly fixed on his laptop screen. "Julian, he's right. This isn't a standard civil property dispute. It's an active structural and utility trespass under Section 42 of the City Administrative Code. There is no injunction to file. There is no appeal process that bypasses a structural safety freeze. Until the owner of Acheron Holdings signs a permanent easement waiver, the city cannot legally activate the high-voltage transformers. The building has no power. It has no water pressure above the 4th floor. It cannot be occupied." The lawyer paused, swallowing hard. "And the banks? The syndication agreement states that if the certificate of occupancy is delayed by a structural title defect, the bridge loans default automatically at midnight tonight." "Van Boer, you missed." The room went completely cold. Victoria slowly sank back down into her leather chair. The porcelain coffee cup sat forgotten on the table, a thin film forming over the liquid inside. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw what was behind her eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't disgust. It was a deep, paralyzing terror. She finally realized that the quiet boy she had spent 20 years erasing wasn't a victim. He was a hunter, and he had been sitting in the blind for a long, long time. "What do you want, Thomas?" she asked. Her voice had lost its ice. It was just hollow. "Name your number. We can do a restructuring, a private stock transfer. We can give you a seat on the executive committee." "I don't want a seat on your board, Victoria," I said. My voice was a flat, calm line. "I've spent 10 years watching how you run this company. You build things out of glass and vanity. You leverage your future to buy your present. I don't want to sit at a table with people who don't understand the value of a foundation." "Then what do you want?" Julian screamed, stepping forward, his hands slamming onto the wood. "Money? You want me to beg? Is that what this is about? You want the golden boy on his knees?" I looked at him, truly looked at him. The expensive cufflinks, the Rolex cosmograph on his wrist, the sweat ruining the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. He looked small, like a child throwing a tantrum in a house that was about to slide down a hill. "I don't need you to beg, Julian," I said softly. "I just need you to look at the clock." Everyone in the room instinctively looked at the digital wall clock above the display screens. 9:42 a.m. In exactly 2 hours and 18 minutes, I continued. The city inspectors will officially log the occupancy denial into the public registry. At 12:01 p.m., the news will hit the Bloomberg terminal. By 1 p.m., your foreign investment partners will trigger their material breach clauses. And at midnight, the bank syndicates will seize the title to the Vance Horizon project to cover the default. I leaned in slightly, just enough to let them see that my eyes were completely dead to their desperation. But the banks can't operate a tower without power either, I whispered. They know it. So 3 weeks ago, I approached the lead underwriting bank, Consolidated Trust. I made a deal with them. The moment Vance Global defaults tonight, Consolidated Trust will foreclose on the property. And tomorrow morning, they will sell the unfinished asset to a private entity called Acheron Holdings for 30 cents on the dollar. Julian's eyes went wide. He stumbled back a step, his hand catching the edge of his chair to keep from falling. You structured the default with the bank. I gave them a solution to a problem you created, I corrected him. By tomorrow noon, I won't just own the dirt beneath your masterpiece, Julian. I will own the masterpiece itself. And Vance Global Developments will be bankrupt before the weekend. Victoria didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the chair, her face completely pale. She knew the math. She knew it was over. The empire she had stolen for her son was turning to ash in her mouth, and she had handed me the match herself. I buttoned my dull gray suit jacket. I looked around the room one last time, at the terrified lawyers, the broken stepmother, the hollowed-out brother. I felt no rush of adrenaline, no sudden surge of joy. True power doesn't feel like a victory, it feels like an inevitability. The gala carpet is very nice, Julian, I said quietly as I turned toward the door. But you should have made sure you owned the sidewalk it was resting on. I walked out. The double doors clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside their own private panic. I walked down the long, chaotic hallway of the 42nd floor. The assistants were still running, the vice presidents were still whispering, but as I passed them this time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like the only real thing in a building made of smoke. I took the elevator back down, not to the basement, to the street. I walked out of the revolving doors of the Vance Tower and stood on the sidewalk of 4th and Madison. The morning sun was bright, reflecting off the 70 stories of glass that made up the Horizon project. It was a beautiful structure, towering high into the blue sky, catching the light like a massive diamond. But as I stood there, looking up, I didn't see the glass. I didn't see the gold lettering. I thought about human nature. I thought about how easy it is to deceive a man who believes he is superior to you. Vanity is the ultimate blind spot. It makes people loud when they should be quiet. It makes them look at the sky when they should be checking the ground beneath their boots. My family spent 30 years laughing at my quietness. They spent 30 years believing that because I didn't fight for their crumbs, I didn't want the meal. They thought my inheritance was a joke, a pile of dry dust and old paper leases that belonged to the dead past. But they forgot that the past is what the present is built on. A gentle breeze blew down the avenue, kicking up a small swirl of gray street dust around my shoes. I watched it rise for a second before the wind scattered it into the air, making it invisible once again. I smiled, pulled my collar up against the morning chill, and started walking down the street, disappearing into the crowd. They were going to beg. I knew that. By 3 o'clock this afternoon, the phone in my basement office would be ringing off the hook. Julian would call, Victoria would call. They would offer me everything. They would offer me the world. But they still didn't understand. You can't offer a man the world when he already owns the ground you're standing on.